Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Jane the Virgin, Season 1, Episode 14, Chapter 14. In this episode, we get a little bit of a flashback to the differences in the way that Jane and Rafael grew up. And it has gone on to sort of inform the way I see them as a couple. We also have some pretty big losses for Rafael. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. Joanna actually commissioned this for Ninth House or Hellbent, but she commissioned one episode more than was necessary for those series. So she said that I could use it towards whatever I wanted. And since there wasn't a Jane the Virgin today, I decided to go with that. You guys, this episode was just like so friggin' packed. So there is two things actually, that I got so sidetracked last episode talking about what was going on with Jane's pregnancy that I forgot a couple kind of important plot points that happened and didn't mention them at all. One is that Abuela has an admirer at her physical therapy. Or, I don't know if it's a chiropractor specifically, but there is a guy who is learning Spanish, and apparently he used to speak it, but he doesn't often. I'm wondering if he used to be married to a woman who spoke Spanish and lost her, and then, is trying to pick it up again for Alba. But she is very unsure of herself, flirting with him. It's extremely clear that he is making an effort, but I won't say that she doesn't welcome it, because she's not rebuffing him. She just doesn't really seem to know how to handle it. And of course, Zoe, I always want to say show. Zoe sees this little interaction. She only sees it for a second, but she very quickly puts it together what's happening here. And she talks to her mom about why Alba hasn't dated anyone. And Alba says something like, it was a choice I made. And Zoe has to push her and be like, yeah, but why? And she said, because your father gave up so much for me. And I was the one who wanted to move to the United States. And he deserves for me to not see anybody else. And this is... Zoe says to her, I knew Dad pretty well. And I just don't think he would have wanted this for you. I think he would have wanted you to be happy and to move on with your life. And when I was watching this episode, I was sitting next to Owen, and I turned to him and I said, babe, if I die, you better not see anybody else. I don't care if you're happy. It's not about that. You just better not dishonor me. I want to be the only one. And I was only half kidding. It's not so much that I really don't care about his happiness, because, in the long term, of course he should move on. Of course. But there would be a part of me, for sure, that would judge how quick he started dating. This is all in a scenario where I'm looking down upon him from heaven, watching his life. And I would be very much counting exactly how much time had passed before he went on his first date, all that kind of thing. So, as much as I think Zoe is right, and I think that what she's saying is healthy, there was a part of me that was kind of like, I don't know. But yeah, this is, I just completely forgot about that scene. And, you know, it doesn't come up this episode. There's no further developments on that front. But I like the idea of Alba starting to grow interested in somebody and date and seeing where that goes. I always appreciate, and I've appreciated this for a while, but as I get older, even more so, of course, seeing older women get to have romance and sex in their lives. And that was part of what was so sort of like earth-shattering about the Golden Girls, was that these were women who were older than television usually portrayed at all. And they were dating and sleeping with men and talking about it and making jokes about it. And it was just not done, really, you know? And I don't think I appreciated at the time just how groundbreaking that was. But nowadays, it's just, there's kind of a bit of a lack in television. We've gotten like so polished and so pretty with so much of our television. Everything feels really sanitized and homogenous. And I wouldn't mind some more stuff focusing on older people. You know, maybe I'm just missing it, but I just don't see it around that often, especially in comedy, which I just, you know, have a soft spot for. So anyway, that's what's going on with her. And then the other thing that I forgot to mention was Rogelio and what is going on with his career. He was, in the last episode, hanging around a lot, and Zoe was starting to get kind of impatient with him. He was doing a lot of online shopping, and she kind of thought that's all he was doing. But what he claimed was that he was just trying to find a way to take his mind off the fact that there were like bidding wars going on. And she was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't know that you had offers. And it turns out that he does get a couple offers. One of them, we find out this episode, is to be the lead in a telenovela. Well, we find it out at the end of last episode. Is to be the lead in a telenovela that is filming in Mexico. So he would be gone for like a year and a half. And that's obviously the better offer career-wise. I say obviously. Things can work out in weird ways. So maybe not. But from what we're given here, it's very clear we're meant to see him staying is going to be a sacrifice on his part. So the other option is to be a co-lead on, I think his name is Esteban, his show. And he is the rival that wound up winning that like telenovela award of, I think like 3 episodes back at this point. And obviously they don't like each other. They're very competitive. And as soon as Rogelio said, or I could do this, I was like, oh man, I know which I'd rather see. Like, I want Rogelio to be successful. So in that sense, a part of me was rooting for him to go to Mexico. But the tension between him and Esteban is so juicy and wonderful. I really want to see them butting heads. So yeah, I'm all for it. And I'm kind of excited that this rival that we only saw for a moment was apparently getting set up to be like more of a thing than I anticipated. So what this all leads to, because neither he nor Zoe wants to admit how they're feeling about the situation. And Jane starts to realize that, like, if she doesn't facilitate an honest conversation, they're never going to actually talk this out at all. and potentially will do something that will make both of them unhappy because they were too afraid to talk to one another about this. So she sits down with the two of them in a very funny scene where she is trying to get her mother especially to open up. And when she asks, like, how would you feel if you took the job in Mexico? Zoe says, bummed. And Jane is like trying to keep her temper and to not laugh. And it's like, okay, bummed. We can work with bummed, Rogelio. And I love that he keeps being like, Dad, you're locked into Dad now, because she said it after he acted the scene that she wrote. And I fully appreciate that he has decided, nope, you broke the seal and that is it. But yeah, Jane is like, well, how do you feel? And I wasn't really sure what to expect in terms of which of them was going to open up first, but I should have known that it was going to be Rogelio who did it, because he's just much more willing to say what's on his mind than Zoe is. You know, and some of that is simply tactlessness, but also there is just honesty mixed in there. So he says that he would be devastated because he has extremely strong feelings for Zoe and he wants to see where things go. And she clearly is taken really off guard and is like, really? And finally, she says, I have really strong feelings for you too. And he says that he's going to stay. And, you know, I love when he says something about how I would shine, of course, as the star of that other show, but I'll outshine Esteban, and I'll do it because you're by my side. And that's a really nice sentiment. I really thought that was sweet. So anyway, that's the conclusion of that whole thing. But it started in the last episode and I just forgot to mention it. And being vulnerable is kind of the theme of this whole episode. So we start off with a flashback. And it's Jane's graduation from high school, I guess. She looks, you know, they're trying to make her look younger by giving her like extensions and stuff. She still looks the same, but I don't mind. It's fine. I'm willing to suspend my disbelief. But she says that she is going to go to the University of Miami and apparently had been considering Iowa because it has a really good creative writing program. But staying in Miami is overall more practical. And that is what Jane tends to do, is the more practical, cautious thing. And she says, you know, Miami makes the most sense. I can write on the side while I'm getting my teaching degree. Plus, if I live at home, I'll save money, which will put me a little ahead of my 5-year plan. And as she says that, we cut to Rafael and his dad, Rafael's date, who is just some nameless babe, and his sister. And his father is saying, you don't even have a plan. I want to give this actor credit here. The guy who's playing Rafael, and forgive me, I don't know the actor's name off the top of my head, but when I see him in a given scene, I know instantly if this is old Rafael or new Rafael. He really manages to convey a sort of like imperceptible change in posture, in tone, in expression that all come together to give the appearance of somebody who's like already a little drunk, maybe a little bit stoned, definitely doesn't give a shit about what's happening around him. And there's like an arrogance to it all. And in the present, he's still got some of that arrogance, but it's really coming from a very different place. And I just really think it's startling when I go to this scene, how immediately I am on board and understanding exactly who he is. We also get this moment where the waiter is trying to pour Luisa a drink, and she is like telling him about how she's in rehab, and her father is like, you don't need to tell him everything, Luisa. But what this scene centers around is Rafael's father criticizing him for being a huge disappointment, not having a plan, not having any goals, not pushing himself or trying to achieve anything, and being really lazy and wasting his time and his money and his potential. And he tells Rafael that he's going to cut him off. And, you know, this is one of those things where I don't approve of a parent being that hard on their kid the way that he is. But also, I can't help but like understand where he's coming from in terms of what Rafael has to work with and how little he's actually done. And what it comes down to, honestly, is that if you are a parent who is talking like this to your kid about how they've done nothing with their life, I really want you to recognize that if there is something lacking with this kid, then probably you fucked up somewhere. And I'm not trying to hold parents completely responsible for the actions of their kids, because to a degree, kids, they are their own people, and they're going to make their own choices, and you can't control that. But something like instilling a desire to do more with your life is a big enough part of being a parent that I feel like if you failed to give that to Rafael and get him excited about doing more with his life, that's on you a little bit, you know? Like, maybe you just spoiled him so continuously for so long, and you failed to notice what it was doing to him until he was an adult because you weren't really involved in his life. And that's kind of the impression I get here, is that, you know, we don't know a lot about what Rafael's deal is with his mother, what happened there, but the energy is that he has been sort of left to his own devices while his dad is the businessman who is very important and does a lot of business. And that Rafael has been sort of expected to simply like pick up the reins of the family business without really being like, without it being considered that maybe he'd want to do something else. But also, I wouldn't even like go so far, because if I were to say his father pressured him to do it, it would suggest his father's involvement more than I think he was involved. I think it was just a sort of like, well, I'll let him like sow his oats and then he'll be ready to settle down and run the business. And that just hasn't really happened. And so now he's like finally tuning back in on what's going on with his son. And then we go to Jane. And when she talks about her 5-year plan, it's all sounds so great. And there's the episode opens with a quote from Woody Allen. I appreciated the acknowledgement of how problematic he is now. But, him saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And truly, especially like a 5-year plan, so much can change in 5 years. It is crazy. So her whole plan is to, finish school and become a teacher and be writing on the side, definitely be married, but no kids yet. She says something about how she wants her life set up first. And I really sympathize with this, you know, as somebody who is also a planner and who tends to want to be more practical in a lot of ways. I really understand approaching things this way. It gives you a sense of control that is maybe an illusion, but it's something. It gives you a sense of purpose because you feel like you really have something specific you're working toward that is maybe not too ambitious, but is still going to require work on your part, and you're still going to have, you know what I mean? And I just, looking at where she actually is in her life now, I feel like she's stayed on her track, her 5-year plan, pretty well all things considered, you know? So, all right. I mean, the pregnancy was not her choice. That's not because she's not in this situation because she didn't take her own goals seriously. It was a freak accident. So it ends with both of their parents talking to them, and Zoe's saying how proud she is. And I can't remember his dad's name again. You guys have told me this before, but he's saying to Rafael, "You're such a disappointment." And both Jane and Rafael respond with, "Thank you, Mom or Dad. That means a lot." And that's like the end of the opening. And I thought that was really good. So we go then to her and Rafael talking about what they're going to put on their registry, their Target registry. Very, very specific Target branding in every episode. They're clearly like the main sponsor. And honestly, it's just fine. I don't mind at all. There's a good way and a bad way to do sponsoring in shows and like product placement. And I think this show is doing it really well, honestly. So they're talking about what to put on the registry, and her and Rafael, their taste obviously is a little different. And then they consider whether or not they need to register for 2 of everything because they aren't living together. And how are they going to handle this whole situation? Which leads inevitably at the end of the episode to him asking her to move in with him. And I really don't see how that's going to work. But then we get Michael knocking at the door and a mention of how Michael had extremely different plans for how his life was going to go until just recently. And we get a montage that I had to pause because I was laughing so fucking hard, you guys. It starts off, it's a really quick montage, starting off with a picture of Michael looking absolutely idiotically excited as he points to a ring inside a jewelry case. Then him looking up at the camera, grinning with Jane while people are throwing rice at them. And you don't see the people, you just see the rice and like the flower petals and stuff. And she's in her, wedding dress and he's in his suit. And then a family portrait. And notably, it's 2 boys that are in the portrait with them, not girls, which I don't know if this was something that they had discussed, but, she's so sure she's having a girl and she's pregnant in the picture as well. And they're all wearing these fucking like white polos with the little yellow, like long sleeves tied around the neck. And this fluffy poodle is sitting in his lap. And I really want to mention that, like, it's a family portrait and everybody is smiling. But the little kid that is standing with his, like, elbow up on Michael's thigh looks like he is trying so hard not to laugh. This little kid, I wonder how many takes they had to do to get this amazing picture. But this little kid was a split second away from cracking up, and you can see it all over his face, and it is fucking gold. I love it so much. So anyway, Michael is here to tell all about Sin Rostro being actually Rose. And you can see that Rafael was fucking shocked by this. There's a whole thing where Michael's like, how much do you want her to hear? And Raphael's like, anything. Why don't you come in? And what it comes down to is a wonderful scene where Jane is looking at the 2 of them talking, and the subject matter is so outlandish that it starts to just feel like a telenovela. And the 2 of them suddenly are in front of like a sunset backdrop and are arguing really passionately in these over-the-top ways where Michael is explaining to him what the thing was that Rose was doing. And Raphael is like, well, at least now you know my dad wasn't involved, to which Michael is like, I don't know that at all. And basically, it's just Michael saying, your dad could still be involved. We don't know where he is. If you hear anything from him, you have got to tell me. They slap each other in the face because that's just what they do on this show. When something is a telenovela, it definitely involves a slap in the face, which I personally am loving. And I don't want more slapping in the face in life, don't get me wrong, but I wish sometimes, looking back at different instances, that I had taken advantage of the moment and slapped in the face when I had the chance, because people definitely deserved it. And I held back for reasons that I feel like weren't good enough now. And then all of a sudden, when Michael is asking where Rafael's sister is, he realizes that his sister's in the mental hospital because they believed Sin Rostro. And he's like, oh my God, I've got to fucking get her out of there. I realize now that probably my sister was not lying. We cut then to Luisa, who is trying to break out of the hospital. And I'm not going to get into this too much because I made it very clear in a previous episode that I do not buy any of this escape thing. This is the shoddiest like the whole way that this is done. It just, there's no way this would work. It's fine. She gets out through the back door and runs into Rafael, who is in the middle of coming to the front door so that he can sign her out. And she just sort of is like, oh, why don't we go in this way? Because it's a shortcut. And he winds up signing her out, and there's no further incident. I am going to miss Betty, the woman who doesn't speak, because she's a pretty fun foil for Luisa. We have an interesting conversation between Jane and her mom here, where Jane is talking about what's going on with the Sin Rostro thing. And her mother asks, do you think that Rafael knows where his father is? And Jane is like, I don't think so. I'm sure he wouldn't hide that. And Zoe says, I would hide you if you did something illegal. And unsurprisingly, Jane says, I wouldn't hide you. And when Zoe's like, but what? But I would. She's like, well, that's because I would never do something that bad. You have a temper. And what I found sort of interesting here was that basically what Jane is saying when she phrases it that way is, you're only saying you would hide me because the likelihood of that ever happening is so low that your commitment isn't ever going to be tested. So we never know. So you can just say that. But probably I don't believe you, or perhaps I don't believe you. And then Jane saying, I would definitely turn you in, is on the surface very Jane, because she is so upright and tries to do the right thing. But let's be honest here. How many of us really think if Zoe did something illegal and was being hunted, that Jane would actually turn her in? I don't see that happening. I think Jane believes she would turn her in because whenever we think about these scenarios, we think about somebody having like committed murder in a sort of vacuum where they just shot somebody with no provocation or whatever. And if they're hiding, then they're hiding because they're just trying to avoid consequences, versus what can sometimes happen, which is that people wind up in situations where they are fighting for their lives, or things look like they did something illegal when in fact they didn't, or they've been set up, whatever. And, there are times where things are sort of justifiable. And I personally, from what I know of Jane, believe that she would struggle a lot, but in the end, she would come down to helping her mother. She would stress to her mother that she should come forward and turn herself in and blah, 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 blah. But I think in the end, she would not tell. Now, that's not to say Michael doesn't seem to know her well enough that he would be able to see she was keeping something from him and get suspicious. But overall, I think that Jane's giving an answer based on logic here. And when it comes to hiding your mother who did an illegal thing, logic is going to be a little bit further down on the list than you think it would be. So anyway, So then we have this scene where, first of all, Petra has returned to the hotel. And I want to mention that Petra's entire look here is a real departure from what we have seen her in so far. And I think that I didn't fully appreciate what the costume department was doing, because I find costuming like really important, obviously, since I like started to go to school for that initially. But Petra has, for most of this show, except for specific events, she has been in khaki and cotton, like, colored shorts and loose shell tops, like silk tank tops, things like that, and high-heeled sandals. So there's always an element of, like, yes, I'm trying to still look good, but the overall outfit is very, very casual and very beachy. And the shoes are sort of the one element that add a real style to what would otherwise be a super casual ensemble. And her hair has always been just sort of loosened down, occasionally up. She comes in here and she is wearing a one-shoulder white fitted like bodycon dress with her hair half up on one side. And the whole look is just so much more glamorous, put together, and attention grabbing than anything else that she has tried for before. And it's very clearly because this bitch right now is feeling herself. She is in a position of power and she knows it. And she is going to flaunt that as hard as she can. And man, I said last episode how I wasn't really sure how much of what she has done was influenced by her mother pushing her to go past what she would normally be comfortable with. This episode, she is fucking ruthless. So I am coming down on she is a like turbo bitch, but I kind of admire it. I don't want to be this kind of person. I don't want to be around this kind of person. But I can sit back and appreciate that she is this cold-blooded in a general sense after seeing her almost like at rock bottom. And it's really funny that the thing that gets me later on that pisses me off is not that she is taking the shares away, not that she lies to Luisa about having a shaman. None of that bothers me nearly as much as the guy who confronts her, the hotel manager, tells her that she is banned from the hotel. His name is Gabriel. She tells him later, tells Rafael that she fired Gabriel. And that, for me, that was the point where I was like, all right, fuck this bitch. She can do all she wants to the other rich people. But this poor fucking peon manager, and granted, managers are still kind of shitty a lot of the time, but he's just telling her what he has been told to do, and she fires him for it. I can't forgive it. I won't forgive it. So that's where she crossed the line for me. Just wanted to make that clear. So we have this scene where Jane comes in and she overhears Rafael on the phone with somebody talking about making sure that he got the money because he wants this whole thing to be over. And she sort of wonders if this is like something about his dad. And he clearly lies to her about what the conversation was about, which leads to later on when she's walking down the hall and sees him coming out of the guest room. She thinks like, this has to be linked with the weird conversation he was having earlier. And she goes and knocks on the door very impetuously. And the person who comes to the door is Zaz's twin brother. But we don't know that right away. So the last episode ended with this scene where I was like, well, is Zaz actually dead? Was that a flashback or is that in the present? And it turned out to be in the present, but that wasn't him either. He is dead, and this is his twin. Which, is it? I'm really curious about this. This whole thing, first of all, I just want to say, I love a twin addition to a story. Is it corny? Sure. Has it been done a million times? Of course it has. That's part of the gimmick of the show. It's fine. I always enjoy the shit out of them, though. Twins plot lines can be done two different ways. One, it can be done in a way that fools you, the viewer or the reader. Or it can be done in a way where you are aware that other people are getting fooled and you just have to watch it happen. And either way, that can work for me. The thing about you being fooled by a twin is you have to be really careful how you handle it, because a lot of times if you're aware that there's like another twin potentially in the picture, you can start to kind of trip yourself up thinking about what the twist is and think, oh, that's probably not him, it's his twin, and kind of get the plot a little bit over convoluted, which not only like ruins a potential twist, but also ruins a lot of the experience because you're preoccupied with thinking about whether you figured it out. It's just, it does though lend itself to some really, really fun, weird things that you can do. And so I am not against it. I don't remember what his twin's name is though, and I'm sure it'll come up in the subtitles in a minute. But this whole scene where she sees him and like freaks out, apparently she just like leaves and she runs into Michael, who immediately knows that she's lying. And when she's like, oh, I'm fine, it's nothing. And when she and Michael go back up to the room, Rafael is there and she's behind Michael looking like a real tattletale. But I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about the scene with Petra when she goes in to speak to Rafael. Because this was one of those scenes where I can't decide if it's the script itself, if it's the direction, or if it's Petra's acting. At first we start off great. She passes Jane, who looks very startled, and says, I thought you left. And I love, she turns and now she's got a scarf on and the sunset is behind her. And she says, oh, I did, but I'm back. And then she slams the door in her face and it's just awesome. But then when we go to inside the office, Rafael and her have this interaction that it feels like she's playing arrogant so hard that it almost doesn't work. Like she does this thing like, oh yeah, I know you banned me. And then the manager, what was his name? Gabriel? That was it? Yeah. Then I fired him. And then when he's like, what the hell are you talking about? Oh, didn't you know? Yes. Well, the company that bought into the hotel, Stanwyck Investments, it's a family company. My old boyfriend's family. And, well, he bought it for me. So, we need to talk about some changes. The hotel's reputation has taken a hit, and I believe that the very first step that we should take towards changing public perception is distancing ourselves from the Solano name, meaning stripping you from your day-to-day responsibilities. Have you ever heard the term silent partner? And it's a little bit too much. Now, maybe that's the whole point, right? It is sort of campy almost. But a lot of the rest of the show doesn't quite feel this campy. So I guess I get a little bit unsure about when it's purposeful. Like, the campy moments that we will have often involve either kind of a physical comedy, like Jane having to climb out of the back of her Mini Cooper, or the moments with Rogelio, where we're focusing on the telenovela acting and how melodramatic he always tends to be as a person. And that feels really specific and like situational. But then it feels like I couldn't quite tell exactly how seriously we were meant to take it. And I think it's supposed to just be that she is being really melodramatic about it because she's finally on top again and is just so like feeling herself so much that she's maybe potentially overplaying her hand a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. But the scene just didn't quite work for me because it felt so over the top with her specifically. So let's see. Yeah, this whole thing, when jumping ahead, Jane goes to the door and Rafael is there with the twin behind him. His name is Aaron. That's his name. Aaron Zazo. I'm Roman's twin brother. And he, it turns out, is a Jain, spelled Jain, which is a religion that follows the tenets of non-violence. And I never heard of this. Be honest with you guys, I had not heard of this. But it is kind of funny since they decided, in Jane the Virgin, they're going to have somebody who is a Jain. And he says that, this dude had been out of touch with his brother for a long time, so he had to hire a private investigator to track him down. Eventually, he found him in Mexico at a orphanage where he volunteered. But he had just been kidnapped by a cartel. And then we go to another like backdrop telenovela version of it. It happens with the cartel. They grab you, they take you, they demand money. I owe this man my life. He's one of the good guys, Jane. And I've got to be like, I'm just gonna, I don't believe this at all. I just don't. I feel like he is a con artist who is pretending to be this nonviolent, but like, I don't know. I'm going to just say he wasn't kidnapped by a cartel. I'm going to say there was something set up to get Rafael to pay this money, and he was getting a portion of it. Something just smells fishy with this guy. Yes, Indian religion founded on the principle of nonviolence. I just want to know what happened to my brother. So then we have the scene between Jane and Rafael. And Rafael is understandably upset at the fact that she told Michael. However, I really appreciated where this wound up a little bit later. Because he says, "Don't you trust me?" And she says, "I do to a point." And he's like, "Well, see, that doesn't feel great." And she's like, "Look, let's be honest. I don't know you that well." And this becomes really clear because of a party game that her friend who's setting up the baby shower is, she printed out like a questionnaire about what his favorite color is, what his favorite song is. And she realizes that she doesn't know a lot of the answers, and it's sort of bugging her. But yeah, I mean, that's really, when it comes down to it, she doesn't know him that well. And I think trust is a hugely important thing in any relationship. Of course, that's really kind of the thing. I feel like if you trust somebody, that's the basis of being able to respect them. And if they trust you, the basis of them respecting you. And I don't know where I read it recently, but there was somebody who was talking about how they feel in a lot of ways respect and trust are like more important than love, because sometimes love can fade away, but respect and trust are a thing that if you don't have those, love can't make up for it. And I thought that was a really interesting point. So yeah, they don't know each other that well. They have just met recently. And even though things are moving pretty fast with them, that doesn't mean that they suddenly know each other well enough to be able to say whether he would hide his father or not. And you guys, not for nothing, but, you know, the whole like, would you trust me to I would never do XYZ? People are capable of a lot more than we think, even people that we do trust, you know? So I always feel like that's kind of a trick question, because if somebody were to ask like certain things of me, like, do you trust that I would never kill a person? No. Like, I think anybody's capable of killing a person. The circumstances would have to be very specific, but I still think it's possible. And there are certain types of things that you can trust somebody you love would never do or would be very unlikely to do. But I think that even when you know somebody pretty well, I'm not mad at sort of questioning things, because not only are people capable of more than we think, but people change over time. And a lot of the time, we don't really see the changes as they're happening, because we have a version of the person kind of locked in our head, and we don't update it as much as we maybe should, and don't allow them the flexibility to change, because we kind of don't want them to change. So all this to say, I appreciated her kind of stopping him in his indignation about her not trusting him, and not only pointing out that they don't know each other that well, but pointing out that he could have trusted her with telling her this, and then she never would have been so freaked out, and he didn't. And she's like, I know it was his safety, but come on, you know I wouldn't have said anything. And Rafael says fair and admits that that is true. So I appreciated that a lot, because yeah, you know, like, trust does go both ways, and you kept this hidden. So his sister, who has gotten out of the hospital, she finds a note from Rose. And Rose says that, I'm sorry to say this, but your father is where the lightning struck, where the fireworks went off. And she realizes that her dad is in that fountain. And they find him. They dig him up. I wasn't sure how soon this was going to happen. I kind of wondered, you know, I was sort of thinking, like I said before, that it would take a while before they realized that Rose was Sinrostro, and that they would be chasing their tails thinking that his dad was Sinrostro and had fled the country. And instead, we're already, you know, catching up to her having fled and being somewhere else, potentially having gotten like surgery, and finding the body. And Rafael goes into immediate damage control mode. And it's a really understandable reaction. A lot of us are people who like react to things that are outside of our control by trying to exert control over the few things we can still affect. So it makes a lot of sense, not only in the sense that he would want to keep busy, but also that the business and the hotel were his father's project and life's work. And if he loses these, he will be even more of a disappointment and a failure than he would have been to begin with, which he knows he was, because his father literally told him that to his face. So it makes a lot of sense to me why he starts handling things the way that he does. And Jane is a little bit unsure what to do, because he is not opening up to her, and she's feeling like she doesn't know what to say to him. She winds up having a talk with Alba after facilitating the conversation between Zoe and Rogelio. And Alba says something about how, like, sometimes you need to show them you're vulnerable in order to get them to open up. And this leads Jane to setting up an evening with Rafael and telling him that she is here for him because she loves him, and just really putting herself out there. And I've got to say, you guys, this scene was very, very well done. Her telling him that she loves him was very unexpected, but it was heartfelt. And then his acting when he says, "I love you back," is so intense. There is like a real passion and focus that I wasn't prepared for. So when he says it back, like, we've all seen a million versions of the "I love you" scene. And a lot of the time it can sort of feel like, I don't know, almost a gimme. Like, it's not exciting because you both have known, like, you've known as a viewer for a while that this was coming. But I felt like the pause and the way he looks at her after she says it, like he didn't realize that was exactly what he needed to hear, and he says, "I love you" to her twice in this like husky, low voice. He's not proclaiming to the camera. He is saying it to her and to himself even. And I just really thought it was well done and really moving and like kind of hot, actually, which saying "I love you" is not something that I would think could be hot, but there it is. And he, tells her about how his dad thought he was such a disappointment. I love her trying to say no. And he's like, no, I know because he told me. And Jane kind of pipes down, and I appreciated her being like, I'm sure he didn't mean it. That's the instinct a lot of people would have, to say like that, he didn't mean the mean things that he said. Don't do that. People say things and maybe they don't mean them, or maybe they do. But if you're the child on the receiving end, you're just going to take it as fucking surface, face value. Yes, he meant it. He said it because he meant it. And he probably said it more than once, And this is also happening with the backdrop of, we had the funeral and he is talking to his sister in the hotel lobby about her shares of the business, which she does not want. And he apologizes to her about not believing her and putting her in the hospital. But he follows up by asking for the shares in such a way that she jumps to the conclusion that he only apologized to butter her up so that he could get the shares, which I do not think was happening. But I can completely understand why she interpreted it that way. It's, like, it's not a, what's the word that people use? It's not a generous interpretation of his motives. But I can understand her not really fucking feeling generous lately. Let's be real. So while Owen and I were watching this episode, we both noticed Petra with her back to them in the background. And I was like, is this just another blonde woman? But she just felt so purposely posed between them during this shot that we were like, that's gotta be Petra. And when the scene ends and we don't see her, I was sort of like, that's weird. Okay. And then we get the flashback later because she tells Rafael in this scene that he can have her shares because she doesn't want them because money has been ruining their lives. I think that's a very easy thing to say when you have money. I don't know that it's money specifically, but who knows? There's other things going on in their family that I clearly don't even know about yet. So we see him like feeling pretty secure that he has her shares. And they start this meeting, which is only an hour after the funeral, which is fucked up, Petra. And I wish somebody had said something to her in the meeting about it. But he says, I am going to have majority ownership, which means that I'm still the boss. And Luisa interrupts and is like, no, sorry, actually, I changed my mind. I'm giving my shares to Petra. And I was like, what the fuck? And then we flash back, and Petra plays Luisa like a fiddle. It is embarrassing. This woman is so easy to manipulate, and I just can't believe how credulous she is. Like, has she not heard of any of the things that Petra has done? I guess she hasn't, a lot of it, because she's been away, and then she was like literally hiding in Mexico, and then she was in the mental hospital, so maybe she missed it all. But Petra just like plays up her sympathy. I'm so sorry for your loss and blah blah blah, and then starts talking about how Rafael is so misguided, and says, quotes some like trite thing, and then that's what my shaman says anyway, because she fucking knows what's up. And Luisa just falls for this hook, line, and sinker. It is just so embarrassing. So yeah, Petra played the game, and she got the shares, and now she is majority owner. And I don't know what to tell you, Rafael, but she won this round. She just did. And it seems like that's kind of a done deal. And Petra once again wearing like this all white, like she is just so cold-blooded. It's amazing. And Rafael tries to say to Luisa, this is crazy. And she like holds a finger up and is like, not so much with that word anymore, if you please. And I was like, yeah, dude, you may want to be a little bit more careful about this. And the scene ends with Petra saying, let's talk about some changes, shall we? From now on, I'm the face of the Marbella. And she is walking through the hotel, nodding to everybody, and just generally making herself known. And when she gets in, she's faced with what looks like Roman standing there, and has a moment where she might fall down. I thought her acting in that moment was really good. Just like the complete shock of it, because yeah, if you didn't realize, I don't know if she knew his brother was his twin. She knew his name, but if you weren't prepared and there's like the image of somebody you thought was dead right in front of your face, that would definitely fucking throw you for a loop. And when he asks what her name is, she says Petra, and he says, it's so nice to finally meet you. My brother's told me so much about you. I'm looking forward to getting to know you. And there is something about the way that he says that as he gets off the elevator that I'm like, what does that mean? And oh, you know what I forgot to mention about Zoe and Rogelio is that it looks like Zoe is taking the fact that he is staying as a commitment. So she decides that she's going to sleep with him after all. And he sort of stops her and says, like, that's not marriage. But they go through with it anyway. Or so it seems. And I'm kind of like judging her a little bit for deciding to stick to it so completely, but then breaking on this, which feels very thin. Like, if you're going to do it, then do it. But if you're not going to do it, then just don't do it. This feels like kind of an excuse. I don't know. So the episode ends with, there's the phone call to Luisa from Rose. Her back's to the camera. She is like, would you still want to run away with me? The narrator says, I wonder if she changed her face. And the fact that he actually says it makes me think maybe she didn't, but I don't know. She's clearly wearing a wig. And then Michael comes into Rafael's office and is telling him about how Rose called Luisa, asked her to run away with her. Luisa said no. And then, she like texted an encrypted number, but now she has disappeared. So I feel really bad for Rafael because, you know, they found his father's body. It turns out Rose was Sin Rostro, and now his sister has fucking vanished, and she has dumped all of her shares in Petra's lap. He's just had a really, really bad day. I just feel for him a lot, you know? And the very last scene, Jane stayed over, and in the morning, Rafael is smiling at her in bed, which is probably the sexiest he's looked. He's not my type at all, but that moment of him like smiling at her while he has like the pillow kind of scrunched up under his chin, that is fucking adorable. And he asks her to move in with him. And that is the end of the episode. We don't see her answer. I feel like it's the most practical thing, but I also don't see how that's a good idea with her being a virgin and wanting to stick to that. But she did stay over. So there's a precedent for them being in the same bed and him not feeling like pressure. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. So, but this is a good episode. There's so much happening. All right, I'm going to wrap this one up, but thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you again very, very much to Joanna for letting me use this slot towards Jane the Virgin. Appreciate you. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.